Hi everyone. Uh, Welcome to the panel discussion. And today we have some really interesting people, and I'm really looking forward to talk to them today about all thing machine learning and data science. And hopefully you will have some of your question answered. And if you have something else, please feel free to write it in the chat, and let's take it from there. Uh, Hi. Hi.
Hello.
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 Thank you for taking the time on a Friday evening. I can understand how you guys are feeling, but thanks a lot for joining.
No
Of
problem at
course.
all.
Thank you.
So instead of me botching your introduction, I think it's best if you guys can say something about yourself, introduce yourself. That would be really great, and we can start with Katarina, if you don't mind.
Yes, my name is Katarina Svenningstorp, and I've been working in the analytics area my whole career in different parts, mainly within the customer analytics area. And I've been working with a lot of predictive modeling during the years, and yeah, more or less everything related to customer-based analytics.
Great.
I've been working 25 years by now.
Great.
So it's a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty long. So you have been working with data science before it was cool. Before
Exactly. At
everybody.
that time, it was called data mining. That was the
Yeah.
cool stuff in the late 90s, but no one is talking about that any longer.
Yeah.
So I've been working at Karolinska Hospital, SAS Institute, Tele2, and as a consultant in different industries over the years.
Great. Peter, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Peter Saltin. I'm a machine learning specialist who focuses on building production grade machine learning services, especially on cloud. So on Google Cloud and on Amazon.
Nice. And Kristofer?
Yes, hi. So I'm Kristofer Ågren. I have a mixed background of consulting and some startups, and also in the last few years it's been mostly telecom in Tele2, and now I'm in Telia, where I'm responsible for a business unit called Data Insights, where we do data monetization. So we build data and insights products that we bring to the market. So one of the products we have is called Crowd Insights, where we use mobility data from our anonymous mobility data from our network that we then package into products that we sell. Tech and math geek at heart, has been coding since I was a kid. Actually, well, I don't code so much these days, but that's still something that is that I love, the tech part of it. And of course, if you love tech and math, then of course data and analytics is kind of goes without saying. So it's been a passion of mine since a very long time.
Yeah, great. So what I did was I put it up some forum that we will have this panel, and we have few questions. So I have grouped them together. People have a lot of questions about it, and I would start with the very obvious, the elephant in the room, kind of the pandemic. Everybody is talking about it, and Katrina, you being now you've been working as a consultant, have you seen its impact after the whole COVID started? Have you seen any changes in the whole data science field?
I mean, of course, most companies run into more budget constraints, and when doing that, you have to think twice about how to where to put your money and where to invest. And I would say that still everything related to analytics and machine learning is still very hot area to work with, but I see a difference from working more on the more innovation side and setting up labs within the bigger organizations, moving towards more what is critical here and now, short term, and how to do savings and then making your processes more efficient. So you actually move into more real business cases from that perspective. That is not maybe innovation because it's not disruptive in a way, but it's still helping to automate processes. So I would say that you see shift moving towards that direction, more short-term thinking.
So it's in a sense it's more focused now, like what you
Yes.
want to achieve. So because of the competitions, yeah. Anybody would like to add to it, or
I can just add our perspective. So for us, it's been the opposite, and I can only reflect on what's happened within my unit at Telia. And for us, we've been providing data about how people move. So for us, it's been the opposite. It's been crazy times as we have been working with the public authorities, for example, in Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Estonia. So we have seen the opposite, a huge need for data and insights, which is, I think has been really cool that we've been able to help in that. So for us, it's been super hectic and crazy.
yeah,
At the same time, we're part of Telia, who has, of course, other parties as well. But for us, it's been a little bit strange because it's been quite the opposite that it has been for many others, actually, specifically within my unit, at least.
Yeah, I mean, when we are at the point when you're talking about the stuff you have done with crowd insight and location intelligence, I have been reading about it and like seen some of your interviews. Would you like to like give some briefs, like some interesting findings which you had during that time?
Of course, be happy to do that. So what we do is we anonymize and aggregate the mobility data that flows through our network. So when a mobile phone is on, then it has to communicate with our base stations. And that means we know essentially how many are connected to a base station. We don't know where the mobile phones are, so there's no tracking or anything like that, but we can see how many are connected to a base station. We know where the base station is. And then that can be, so that's what we use as a basis for the anonymous and aggregated data. So we can see the movement in society. We calculate the number of trips made. So the total movement essentially in society, we can follow that over time. And since we've had this since a couple of years, we can compare it also what would be a normal movement, because that's kind of been the issue. Like, you probably heard also in the news, people talking about, oh, it felt really crowded on the road this morning. A lot of people are going to work. They're probably not following the recommendations. But as you all working with statistics knows, it's all about what you're comparing it against, and humans tend to be quite subjective. So it's been really cool when media has actually come to us, and also authorities, to ask for real data. So we've been able to then actually show that, well, it turns out that sure, there were people on the road, but it was actually less than it would have been if it was normal times. We compared to 2019 data. So in the data we saw, for example, in mid-March, that's when the pandemic really hit and the recommendations were made. Perhaps you remember in Sweden, Stefan Löfven, Prime Minister, talking about really needing to change behavior. And immediately we saw a dip in the total trips in Sweden of about 30%. Oh. And that's a huge number, because that's all movement. And if this would have happened any other day, we would have been really afraid that our systems were broken. Showing that kind of deviation from one day to another, I mean, it's pretty much impossible statistically for that to happen otherwise. So we saw that, and then we were also compared to the other Nordic countries. So it's been pretty interesting to see that Sweden dipped in the beginning, and then the other countries did so as well, but deeper, because they had harder restrictions, tougher restrictions from the government. So Swedes who only had recommendations had a lower dip, but in Sweden we have actually maintained a lower amount of travel compared to 2019 over time. So we have been more resilient, or we didn't bounce back as quick. So it's been interesting also to compare the countries. Like Denmark dipped really hard, but also bounced back quite quick. And now we see also as there's unfortunately, of course, a big uptick now in COVID cases. So in Sweden, for example, week 44, there was new recommendations for Stockholm, and immediately we saw total travel dip by about 15% from an already lower level. For those of you interested in these numbers, you can find them on the Telia website. We actually publish these high-level aggregates every Wednesday. And of course, you can ask questions specifically to me as well. But this is what we do, so we continue to follow this. And for someone who loves data, it's great to be able to help out with real facts in these times, and going from these signals that we have in our network to actual insights that are consumable. There's lots of stuff that happens in between with data quality, machine learning, and so on in order to get to that. But that's another story.
Yeah, and you might not be aware of, but I have won a lot of arguments because of this data which you publish every Wednesday. So like,
oh really?
Yeah. So I just show them the data, and so like, yeah,
that's great to hear.
Yeah. So it's, yeah. I mean, it's up there, and people who are interested into actually looking into data, they can just go there and check it out.
But isn't that a big change, I would say, with the pandemic? Suddenly, all people are interested in data and data-driven insights. I think it's wonderful from that perspective. We would never have managed to do that big change in a short time without a crisis.
Yeah, and I guess like people are trying to get their production line streamed and everything. So yeah, we are moving into data in that sense. It kind of helped. When we are at the topic of like tracking user and stuff, like have you seen, because we have now moving more and more towards privacy and we have GDPR and stuff, do you guys think that it has made it difficult for machine learning models more? And I'm talking more in terms of personalization, where we're trying to personalize something. Do you think it has made it tricky, or how have you guys faced any of this issue? Like, so has it come into your day about, and like how are you going about it? If somebody like,
well, it's you've heard a lot from me already, but for this crowd insight service, is the only reason it can exist is because it is based on fully anonymized and aggregated data. So for us, for this type of service that we're providing, it's actually a unique value proposition. It has to be anonymized and aggregated. And when we started this a few years back, I mean, no one looked at any data until we spent a lot of time with the lawyers, and also from an ethical standpoint, like, is it ethical to actually use this data? So I wasn't a part of that at the time, but I'm sure it was quite frustrating for the analysts who just wanted to get to the data. But it was important for us to assure that this was fully anonymized and aggregated. And I think from my previous experience, I think there's a lot of places where anonymized data is just as good, and it gets you out of trouble really easily by, instead of having to get stuck in managing consent and that whole thing, then actually working more and more with anonymized data. I think that's something that we should be doing a lot more, as it just simplifies the whole thing, and it's also the ethical thing to do. If you can work with anonymized data, why don't do that? Why do you work with personal data unless you absolutely have to?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I think GDPR and e-privacy definitely makes it a bit harder and more challenging with machine learning. When it comes to workloads that is supposed to personalize content, or where you can't really work on anonymous data, you need to know who the user is in the end in order to be able to personalize. And that is definitely added complexity in how to solve data protection, and at the same time have useful and good machine learning services and workloads.
Yeah, I definitely think that GDPR is here to stay. It's not something we can choose or not choose any longer. I mean, when it came, we were a bit resistant when you wanted to do personalization and customer analytics. That was really not the best thing to hear about GDPR. But I think we have come to the next level now, where we are not talking about whether is it good or not, because I mean, it's here and it's good from us as private people to be able to control our personal data, so it cannot be pushed anywhere to anyone, that we actually can choose whether we want to share this data or not. So now it's more about I agree with Kristofer with the ethical part here, that when do we really need to have personal data? And if we use personal data, how can we make sure that we weigh this towards the person and the business value? And I mean, we have for a long time talked about how you can trade with your personal data. And I think that we're going to see much more of that in the future, that how you can trade with your personal data by, maybe we will not pay for any newspapers in the future at all. We might only pay with our personal data, and they will be the new big analytics companies selling refined data and insights. So that might be their core business in the future, maybe not the media part of it. So I mean, I think we are in the change of this already.
Yeah, that makes. I mean, yeah, this is something which has to be done. So yeah, and I guess all the companies need to adapt to it somehow and make it more ethical.
I kind of quite also like. I'm becoming to like GDPR. Actually, it's because it's also forcing the analysts or everybody along the chain from data to action, insight and action. It's forcing everybody to think about the purpose first, because through GDPR, if it's going to be personal data you're going to process, you have to have a purpose. So you need to understand what is the purpose. And I think I've done myself the mistake in the past, and not breaking GDPR, I'm not saying that, but I've made the mistake of being excited of there's a lot of data and you bring some answers, but there wasn't really a problem to solve, or the problem that you were solving with your answers perhaps wasn't the most important one. So it kind of forces you to think more about the purpose. And if you haven't figured that out, then I challenge you to, why are you building an algorithm at all if you don't fully understand the purpose? So that's kind of an interesting side effect that I've been coming to appreciate more and more.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think like my only problem with this whole thing is, why is this word so difficult? Like every time I'm presenting, I have to say like I fumble every time. It has to be a simple word. Apart from that, it makes total sense.
You have not enough practice.
Yeah, like either it's that or the pseudonymization. So it's like I have to think about it in my mind before I have to say it. So that's my only problem with that one. So yeah, now we are talking about like this whole new GDPR thing and everything coming up. Like, I mean, when our organization is starting with machine learning, how do you think like they can they can generate the ideas, right? Because that's the biggest problem when they want to start with machine learning model. How can they generate ideas which they can solve with machine learning, or like how should they start with it? Like, do you have any input on that, or it's too?
I mean, if you want to have that as a function that should be part of your everyday business, then you need to set up a process for that, where you manage ideas coming in, and you need to set up processes where you can evaluate those ideas in a proper way to decide what to prioritize to work on. And I think there there are some basic rules, more or less, you can follow to decide what to prioritize and how you do that with. Usually you have a cross-functional team that you work with to do these prioritization sessions, where you compare the possibility of having success by looking at how difficult it will be to implement, and what business value it will bring to you, and also what possibilities do you have to automate this process and to scale this, because that's the other part. Is it needed to do it with machine learning, or do you have another way of doing it? So you should also evaluate, is this in the right field or not? And to do that, it sounds like really easy when you talk about it, but you really need to set up a process and function where someone is responsible for pushing this through and to do this prioritization, and also having the sponsorship from the leadership to work with this as well, because it tends to be, like you talked about in the beginning, a lab environment where you don't really get into the daily business in the end. And then it becomes really difficult to implement if you don't have support from somewhere in the on the business side, a stakeholder somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, when we are talking of this, Peter, now I'm looking at you because I know you are expert on this. So when you like a lot of companies, they do machine learning, but not all of them have like it is in production and running and a proper workflow. So, I mean, can you give a brief idea about how should be the workflow of a model from like an ad hoc POC to till it goes into production? And where do you think most of the effort goes into when companies trying to put its product into like a machine learning product into production?
So are we still talking about the company starting from zero here, or can we assume that there is some type of infrastructure in place as well?
Let's assume we have some infrastructure. They have been doing machine learning, but nothing in production.
Yeah. So where do you put the most effort? Like if you're talking moving into production. So obviously prototyping models is important just to verify that whatever use case you're working on is you can actually model it and have a model that could be useful. But where a lot of the energy and effort goes into is typically not just in the ML algorithm and optimizing that, but going through and ensuring that you have a solid end-to-end data pipeline so that your production workflow is robust, that you have that you're able to have handle onboarding, and if you're thinking long term, like onboarding and offboarding new people will become a problem. So you need to have good code standards and build for essentially use version control and have CI/CD. That can be some effort put in that, like refactoring code, so that you make sure that you have you're meeting good general software engineering practices. There will typically be a lot of effort if you're moving to. I mean, there's a difference if what type of workflows you're talking about. If you're talking about batch machine learning pipelines or real-time machine learning pipelines or some type of nearline scoring workflows. So if you're moving towards real-time or near real-time, then you're going to spend a lot of time on that type of infrastructure to make sure that your latency is good enough for the insight being produced. So actually, like what typically you want to have a machine learning model and you think you're going to spend a lot of time looking on the algorithm itself. When you move to production, it's all the things around it, all the supporting infrastructure, having sound architecture, and having also a team that are capable to deliver all this together. That is where the real hard part is, I think, and where you spend the most time.
Yeah. Okay. And like whenever we talk about data science and machine learning, most time people think about analyst or data scientist. But how much do you think it's like the role of data engineering or engineers or the machine learning engineer is in that, and how crucial is that in a successful data science department of any company?
Like how much of the work that is made of by a data scientist versus ML engineer or a data engineer? Yeah. I think it depends a bit on the environment that you are working in. Obviously, if you're completely based on premise, there's going to be much more need for roles that are maintaining and developing and setting up that infrastructure and just operating that. But let's say assume you're on cloud, then probably looking at just talking about the data engineer and data scientist. You're probably looking at 2 data engineers per 1 data scientist or something like that. But in general, I think like most data scientists should be very concerned with production and start learning how to write good software and good applications, so that the bridge between data engineers and data scientists are kind of less hard cut.
Yeah.
Before, like a straight data analyst role, were more capable of like doing like queries and analysis, then if that is the kind of profile, then you're gonna have obviously more data engineers or ML engineers. But
Okay.
but if the data scientists are capable of writing good software, then probably a 2-to-1 ratio in the team.
Okay.
I think you have a good
Maybe,
point there, Peter. It depends. I mean, of course, what you then qualify as a data scientist or a data engineer. But what we see, because keep in mind, whatever we're putting in production, we actually have to be able to sell and get paid for. So it's it isn't really an option to do stuff that doesn't scale or otherwise our customers will not pay for it. And with that, and that's something everybody in my unit has in mind. So whether you're working with data science or really building the pipelines, it has to be something that you need to be able to put in production. And I mean, I'm even challenging my salespeople to be able to go in and write SQL so they know what they're selling. So I think there's also a point to be made that these are skills that are useful also beyond the roles of data science and data engineering. It is useful to have some of these skill sets broader also.
Yeah.
how does it look like in your area, Kristofer, when it comes to the production workloads you have for ML? Like how many engineers do you have per data scientist?
So we have decided to use partners as much as possible and do as little as possible ourselves. So for us, we just have a few data scientists and a few engineers, probably a ratio of 2 engineers to 1 data scientist. I mean, pretty much what you were saying, Peter. So what we do is we build the new things, and then our partners will operationalize it because that's what they're really good at. And we also try to be in a low touch environment as much as possible. So we're running our stack in GCP. So we try to do as much as possible that's managed, and we will pay for the consumption. And I don't want to have people. For us, it doesn't work to have the skills that's more towards the infrastructure and deeper. I want everything to be as close to the data and the value as possible. So we keep it very lean and then push as much as we can to our partners who are the best at what they do. And one of the partners we have is called Unacast, which is a company out of Norway. It's a startup. They have a platform that runs on GCP, and I mean they're great at productionalizing the algorithms in their environment and making sure that it runs. And we have SLAs and so on against them. So I'm finding a bit of a mix, how to do this so that we can actually have something that runs all the time, that we can sell, that's comparable over time. I mean, the question earlier about how to on what you need to think about when you're putting things into production. I mean, one thing is to keep track of old predictions. So if you predict something and then you predict something else a week later, and then your customer is gonna perhaps want to compare that, and then what happens when you update your algorithm? You increase the precision, but that means it's no longer comparable to your old prediction. So you get into all these really interesting things when you have this thing as a product and it's out there. Of course, depending on Peter, like you said, I mean, there's many different types of whether it's real time and what the actual use case is. But for us, we're looking at everything as a product essentially.
Great. I'm Katarina, you have been working with data science for such a long time, right? as we talked, like you were working before, like people, it was a cool thing. You were there from the very start. But have you seen anything
From the
like?
very start. Thank you.
The
Yeah, not
founder.
in found, but like yeah, people have been like hyping data science so much in last 2-3 years. And what do you think has changed in last 3-4 years that you see a lot of companies talking about machine learning a lot? And I don't see even a single keynote about any product where they don't put AI or machine learning into. So like what has changed which has led to so many companies adopting to machine learning and moving towards more data centric?
It's a lot of different things, but what I see close to where I'm working, it is often related to like when you want to do something with digital data, for example. That's something that is not fitting into the old way of thinking about data, where you usually structure your data in a nice way for the business side in a data warehouse or similar. And suddenly you have big volumes of data coming in from other sources, or suddenly, but they have been there for some time, but they have not used it for analytical purposes. I think that's the biggest difference. And then when you try to connect all this data, then you need a new platform to do this and to be able to manage all these volumes of data. And then if you then do the analytics part of this somewhere, if you have good, nice findings that you want to use then and put in production, then there is no really good way of doing that without working with machine learning and create a package of that can live on its own, or that can be fully implemented into existing solution that you have somewhere in the organization. So I think if you go back, if you go back 15, 20 years back, no one really talked about embedding machine learning or advanced analytics into operational usage. Then it was more about, we can run this during the night and then we can get the result for the next day. That was like the level where you could use advanced analytics. And now the needs are so much more real-time related than it was 20 years ago. That's one of the things, but I think that's where we see most applications coming up right now is related to the need of the more real-time activities.
Yeah. Okay. We got also some of the question from people who wants to get into data science or like are aspiring data scientist. And one question which comes up quite a lot is like, how much important is a PhD if you want to be a data scientist? Like you have this debate going on, and like you guys are working with other data scientists. Do you think it's like really a very important criteria when you go and look for a data scientist that they have a PhD? Somebody wants to.
I wouldn't say that's a key deciding factor whether it will be a good data scientist or not. But of course, education matters. So having a master or a PhD in a data-driven field like statistics or similar, of course, helps with understanding and can be useful in the day-to-day work. But I don't think that's the key deciding factor if you have a PhD or a master or a bachelor, or if you have spent a lot of time gaining that knowledge in other place in university.
Okay.
I think I agree with you there, Peter. It really is. I think there's no yes or no to that question. Perhaps first, you have to look at what PhD is it? What is it in? You can do a PhD in a lot of things that have nothing to do with analytics. But what I find is that it's often the combination of multiple things that become important. So it's hard to get away from the fact that at least when you apply machine learning in a commercial setting, it's hard to get away from the fact that it's important to also understand your domain. it's also important to understand. It's important to understand what are typical use cases. How will this insights be used, and so on. And that is in commercial settings. If you use it as for in academia or other areas, it might be different. But applying machine learning in commercial setting, it has to have a value at some point, because you're working for a company who needs to make money. So either you're contributing to making more money or you're saving cost. And it doesn't matter if you had a deep PhD in something. If you have to be able to grasp that also, and PhD or no PhD. And then I would say the practical aspects of just performing machine learning these days, it's so much easier than it was just a few years ago. There's so much more available in terms of frameworks, and it's easy to get started. I will say though, in some cases, I mean, it's also hard. I mean, if you don't have a really strong understanding of math and especially statistics, it's kind of hard to succeed over time, because as you put your stuff in production and you need to explain certain things, why is there a variance? Can I trust this number? And so on. So you really need to be confident in backing that up, and for that you need to I mean, just like Peter saying, you need to have studied it some way or the other.
So yeah, it's not more about PhD, but it's more about you should have knowledge about the basic concept of statistics and maths and all those stuff. So if you know
I think it's hard to get away from, and also engineering becomes more and more important as you put more stuff into production. But other than that, it's understanding the domain.
Yeah.
It's really, there's very few, I think, that work with machine learning that have the luxury to just really only know that and be really deep in that. At least if you're in a private organization, you're going to be expected to also understand why you're there. And the business value that you're creating. Is it cost saving or is it increased revenue? It's usually in either of those two. And if you cannot create a connection to that and the relevancy to that, then I think it's going to be hard in the long term.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to expand a little bit, I think to be successful in a commercial setting, you need to be somewhat like a T-shaped kind of profile, or maybe you have your expertise in statistics or software development or similar, but you need to have all these other soft skills as well to back it up with. So just being complete an expert only in one particular part there doesn't necessarily go a long way in a commercial setting. You need to be able to back it up with other skill sets as well.
Yeah. When we're talking about this, like if somebody is starting with machine learning, do you would you recommend any particular programming language, or you would say that they should start with whatever they are comfortable with? Like, because there is whole debate always going on online about R versus Python. Like, have you seen something used more, or it really doesn't matter as long as you know what you're doing?
If I just look at the customers we have and what they primarily want us to use, then the last year it has been more Python than R.
Yeah. I guess because it's easy to make it. Yeah, it's kind of object oriented in that sense. It's easy to.
Because often it is also related that you want to modernize your environment as well, and maybe move to a cloud environment, and you didn't have that before. And then it also becomes more engineering related, and then Python is more a common language between ML specialists and data engineers, while R is more related to the analytics and business analytics field. So that's at least my feeling from where we see in what direction you go.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna have to go with Python also. I think that's what I'm seeing, at least in my experience, and also there's just seems to be so much more information available in Python, and the latest libraries are often available on Python, I think, earlier than in other environments. And then as an old C++ guy, Python really bugs me because it has a lot of intricacies that someone who wrote C++ back in the day gets frustrated about, like weak typing and so on. But I think that's more me than anything else.
Yeah, you can't deny that Python is very huge in the machine learning field. So if you're going for one language, then probably Python is a good bet. But you should also consider backing it up with some production grade languages like Java or Scala.
Yeah. Okay. I will try to squeeze one last question before time's run out. So, like, not all machine learning projects they become successful, and some of them do fail. But like, has it happened to you? And like, can you share some of the insight? Like, even if a project fails, can we get some insight or something out of it?
Now all of us will say no. We have never seen that happen.
Yep, that's it. End of the panel. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's part of everyday work. Is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Depending on how you go about to build your data science product. If you're building it very modular, maybe you have reusable components that you can reuse in other projects. There's typically some learnings to do if you look back on the product and see why did it fail. Could you have done something differently in the beginning? Maybe be more focused on the business outcome initially, if that's why you failed. If that's the failure, that you didn't get the business outcome that you expected, and maybe considering doing more prototyping or early pilots in the beginning. So I would say that's the 2 key values, like the learnings from why it failed, important to have. But then depending on how you built it, maybe there are some architecture or pieces of code that are reusable for other projects as well. That can be part of the value that's created.
I think the learning from my end is you can never spend too much time understanding how you measure if the project is successful or not. Because that's kind of the thing, right? I mean, was the project successful? Well, usually it's in my experience, it's not because the algorithm you didn't reach the precision needed or whatever metric you have to evaluate it, but it was because perhaps it wasn't clear enough or at least not broadly understand. You didn't have the broad understanding of what is it that makes a project successful. And I guess the boring thing to keep hammering, but really understanding what is it that makes something successful? How do you measure success? And that's usually a business outcome, at least in private organizations. And you can never spend too much time on that. And that's not writing code, unfortunately. I wish it was. That would be simpler, but that's other skills that you need to apply.
Yeah, and also that you make the question too big, so that's also related to what you say, Kristofer, that how then to measure success. Because if you may have a too big question, it actually might be 5 different questions you're trying to answer in one big question. And then usually you get problems when you try to find the right data to use as well. And then when you have the data, or you think you have the data, then you actually don't find the right features in the data because you're not really sure of what question you are answering, and then everything gets mixed up and you don't get a result as you expected. So a lot is also going back to making sure that you have the data that you need to be able to answer the questions we talk about. And sometimes that is not even possible to know from start because you need to iterate a number of times before you know that. And if you then have like complex environment when it comes to getting data, you might need to order it from somewhere and it will take you several weeks before you can have it. And then you also get it in the wrong format and so on. Then it tends to take a really long time before you come with a result and solution. So insufficient data, not understanding the content of your data, that is also a typical thing that makes you end up with not the success you expected, at least.
Great. I think I already took a lot of time out of you guys for like a Friday evening, but yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for coming, and this was really great listening to all of you after such a long time. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
It's good discussion.
Yeah. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.